bless you, Guyana, and welcome to Facing the Nation. I am Malika Ramsey. Thank you very much for joining me again this week. The focus this week is on disaster preparedness management. Of course, Guyana, we are in a sense very fortunate because we're not plagued or we're not affected by things like hurricanes, which is really the big one. But of course, we have issues to deal with, like when it rains in Guyana, it rains like right now. So we have to think about flooding in various communities, and when there's no rain, we have to think about the horrid effects of drought situation. So today, the first half of the program is dedicated to focus on what the CDC has been doing. And of course, CDC in this case means Civil Defense Commission, what the CDC has been doing in the past, what they're doing right now, and how they're preparing to move forward and to ensure that in the event that Guyana comes into the path of disasters, they can respond and provide the necessary relief for our citizens. So the first half of the program is designed to deal with that. And on that note, I take this opportunity to introduce to you Major Kester Craig. He is the Deputy Director of the Civil Defense Commission, and he's also the Operations and Training Officer. It's my pleasure to welcome him to Facing the Nation for the first time. Welcome, Major.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Malika.
All right, great. Coming up in the second half of the program, well, I'm not going to do much talking today in the second half as I usually do. On Wednesday, there was a post-cabinet press briefing. Of course, that is normally hosted by the Minister of State, Joseph Harman. So I'll bring you some clips of that press conference. Of course, he dealt with a number of current issues that you may want to hear about and, hear for yourselves from him, from the horse's mouth, as we say. I know some of you would have read some of the seen some of the sound bites on television and read some of the inserts and so on in the newspapers, but it's good that you can get an opportunity to hear it directly from him. But for now, let's talk about the CDC's successes, its plans, and so on. Major Craig, 2016 seems to have been a very active year for the CDC, an active period, what would have gone already. How have you managed to be successful in your efforts?
All right. Good afternoon once again. The Civil Defense Commission is the National Disaster Management Agency, which is in existence for about 34 years.
Wow.
When initially established, the focus was mainly on preparedness and response, and mainly preparedness and response as it relates to fire and floods, those two major hazards. But over the years, internationally, regionally, the focus is more on comprehensive disaster management. When we talk about comprehensive disaster management, we take into consideration all people, or we say all stakeholders. This include residents, include the private sector, the public sector, NGOs. It also includes working with all the different hazards. And when we talk about hazards, we talk about floods, droughts, tsunami, fire, health hazards, accidents, all of these things that could cause a harm to society. And we also look at integration of things such as information communication technology, integration of gender issues, climate change adaptation, and also looking at areas where you could have risk reduction. So the focus is more on how do you reduce our risks. So 2016, the latter part of 2015 and 2016, the CDC has been very, very active. And I think the approach now is more of a risk reduction approach and not wait and something happen and then react to it. So we focus mainly on looking at, first of all, monitoring what's happening, and I must make note that we now have a 24 hours monitoring system. And to me, what I call this system is like a third eye. So if, for instance, the public cannot make contact with the police, they cannot make contact with the fire, or they cannot make contact with the hospitals for maybe an ambulance for emergency, they could call the CDC and we have somebody there working 24 hours. When the person received that call, they would make contact, say, directly with those agencies, or if they're not getting those agencies, they try to get the heads of agencies or the ministers or the permanent secretaries to ensure that response is given in a timely manner to people who are affected.
Let's just say in the event that that happens, you get a call or a group of people they can't get the police, because we know that's a continued complaint, and I'm going to get to how you're supporting the public health system, but let's say that happens. Is the CDC equipped enough to, even without getting in touch with the other agencies, maybe ministries, is the CDC capable at this point in time? Do you have the capabilities of handling an emergency on your own? A major emergency, that is.
No, you see, disaster risk management system is not a one agency something. It's a multi-agency system. So we have several agencies on board. So we have the police, the fire, the health, all the different agencies in the country, even to the agencies in the mining sector that work with us. So over the years, what we've done, we've trained people in different areas of disaster risk reduction, disaster management. So for instance, we've trained people in emergency operations center management. We've trained people in damage assessment and needs analysis. We've also trained people in shelter management, search and rescue. So when something happens, we have to rely on those persons. So the CDC is mainly the coordinating agency, coordinating before and coordinating during and even after a disaster or emergency.
Do you feel that there's enough public knowledge on the CDC's role? Because it's a really important role from what you've pointed out thus far.
No, there's not enough. We've started a number of programs and with funding through IDB. Last year, the year before, we rolled out a program on public awareness. And that worked. Some more person got to know about the CDC. We've also worked with GINA to put out information on the CDC, but there's still a lot of more public education and awareness of the work of the Civil Defense Commission and the role and the important role the Commission plays in society. So for instance, we need to get information down to all the regions, down to all the communities. But we have programs whereby we're trying to get down to community, but there's so many communities in this country that we or the Civil Defense alone cannot do it. So what we started in 2012 is establish what is called a volunteer corps. And the volunteer corps is trying to get young professionals at the community level to work with us. So what we do, we bring in those people, we train them in different areas of disaster management. However, the focus is on community-based disaster risk management. So we train them to go into communities and help develop, one, for us to conduct an assessment of the risks of the community. So look at what are the hazards affecting the community, what are the vulnerability of the communities, and also what are the capabilities of the communities. After we complete that part, we develop a plan for them. Then we try to identify priority, mitigation, and risk reduction projects. So you're trying to reduce flooding, trying to reduce drought. And then in some cases, we establish what's called CERT teams, Community Emergency Response Teams. And those teams now are like teams who are going to be on standby in the community in case something happened to respond. There's also damage assessment teams at the community level. But I think the issue with those teams and those the community system is the sustainability aspect of it. It needs to be integrated into the local government system. Okay. So right now we're working with the local government, the Ministry of Communities, to ensure that these systems are now integrated into the local government system. And if I could probably add some more, we've gone so far now as working with developing the regional disaster risk management system, because you want to have a continued integration from the national level right down to the community level. Because when something happens, the first people to be impacted are the people in the community, and you must have a system in place. So from 2014, 2015, and now, we have started work and developed what's called a regional disaster risk management system in Region 2, 3, 5, and 6. And what the system entails, first of all, doing a risk assessment of the regions and having a risk profile. And out of that, we've developed what's called a regional disaster risk management plan. And then we're going to set up what's called a regional disaster risk management committee. And we've already developed terms of reference to the committees. And we're also setting up what's called regional emergency operations centers. And with those centers, where they're going to coordinate the regional activities. So we need to have some amount of decentralization. But before that, from 2012 coming up to 2014, we've trained persons within the region to manage the regional emergency operations center. So it's a taking the whole disaster risk reduction step by step, not only at the national level, but at the regional level and the community level. And when it comes to the national level, dating back from 2005, So now we have trained over 3,000 persons in various areas of disaster risk management.
All right, I want to jump in here. Two things. First up, have you? I know you did. It's a lot that you've said. You are doing a lot, but in terms of those, the 300 that you've trained, have
3,000.
you 3,000? Sorry, have you seen the benefits? Have you been reaping the benefits?
We are in some cases.
Because you don't want to train people and
yes.
put them out, and then they're not giving back to the programs.
We are in some cases seeing some of it. For instance, some of the regions are now able to do their own damage assessment. Some of the regions are able to do their own shelter management. Some of the regions are now able to manage their own emergency operations center. So we're seeing some of the fruits, but in some cases, you're going to lose some people. But we have a register with all these persons, and we try to keep in contact with them and sometimes do refresher training. Sometimes what happens to people get transferred, and we try to keep track of them. So if they move from region 2 to 3, we try to keep track of them and ensure that they're part of the regional system if they work in the same area.
Will you ever be concerned, or I should say, is the CDC concerned about, because in my head I'm thinking Guyana should move to a place, especially if we're so firm on further development, we should move to a place where in each household there is somebody who can do at least CPR. Is it your intention to have these officers that are being trained, these professionals that are being trained, to somehow find a way to take that into the residents, the households of themselves, that people, you must know, this is Guyana, not everyone has a fire extinguisher.
Yeah.
Not everybody can do CPR. Only the other day, there was an unfortunate accident. The young lady died, may her soul rest in peace, where there was an accident on the East Bank. And the way that, I know they meant well, but the way they were moving her, are you, is it your intention to have these officers, the work that they do trickle down into various residents and so on?
Yeah, and as I said, disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction start at the individual level and then goes to the family level, then the community level. And I think that's a very good point, because right now we're in discussion with Habitat for Humanity to develop family disaster preparedness and response plan.
Okay.
And so that now tied into the community plan. So for instance, in the family plan, there going to be certain guidance in terms of, look, each family should have at least food and water to last at least 72 hours. Because sometimes access to communities might be difficult and it takes time. And that's internationally recognized standard. You must have certain things in place. Additionally, families must have a safe place where they have all the important documents, medication. So if something happened, they have all these things in one place that they can use to save their lives. As you mentioned, I think definitely we have to go whereby family members are able to support in the case of an accident in terms of doing CPR and things like that. So we haven't gone fully into family because it's very expensive to go and train all households. But we encourage members of families to go and enroll in programs. For instance, Red Cross have programs in CPR. The St. John's Ambulance Brigade got programs in CPR. But whenever we do community-based disaster risk management, as part of the CERT, the Community Emergency Response Team, first aid, is part of the training. So some among the people at the family level or the household level would receive that training. You mentioned a very critical point. People are not having fire extinguisher in the homes. And as part of the family plan, you must have things like fire extinguisher. If you can't afford fire extinguisher, you have SAN available, and you must have an evacuation plan for your house, especially when it comes to fire. Because you find now people are constructing their homes and using grills, but then there's no evacuation. So when there's a fire, they trap in the home and then eventually they die. So we need to look at those things and try to be risk conscious. Look at what's the hazard that going to affect you at home and see how you can mitigate it or see what plan you could put in place to reduce your losses and save life.
Okay, great. Viewers, if you're now tuning in, this is Facing the Nation. Today we're talking about disaster risk management in Guyana. These are things that we only talk about when something happens, when disaster hits, and that is wrong. We should always be prepared in our minds, as Major Craig just said. Of course, for those of you who are now tuning in, Major Craig is the Deputy Director General of the Civil Defense Commission, and he is also Operations and Training Officer. Let's talk about support now. Support that CDC CDC would give to other countries. I know there was a disaster, there was a hurricane in one of the islands last year, and the CDC was a part of giving some release to them. So let's talk about what is in place for the CDC to be able to share Guyana's resource with other countries.
All right. Guyana has been supporting other countries impacted by disasters for years. Hurricane Ivan, Hurricane Hugo, and a lot of other disasters. And mainly some of these support, and as I said, the CDC or the disaster risk management system is not a one agency something. So we are part of what's called CDEMA, the Caribbean Disaster Emergency Management Agency. And as part of CDEMA, we fit into the regional disaster risk management mechanism. And through that, we would liaise with these different countries when they're impacted and try to provide support, mainly through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So, for instance, in case of Hurricane Ivan in Grenada in 2004, we've sent a team of soldiers to help with rebuilding and reconstruction. In some cases, from at the CDC level, we would send persons, for instance, I'm trained in damage assessment and needs analysis and emergency operations center management at the regional level. So we would go and help the country in terms of coordination, response, damage assessment. They also have regional damage assessment teams on standby, especially during the hurricane season like now.
Yeah.
And the fact that Guyana is not really in the hurricane part, we're always on standby to go and assist in assessment and give various support. Apart from that, Haiti, in 2010, when they were impacted by the earthquake, we also supply foodstuff, food items. And quite recently, I think it was St. Lucia, St. Vincent, we've also, Dominica rather, we've also sent rice to Dominica. So Guyana is always generous in providing support to countries affected by disasters. And likewise, when we are affected, those countries show the support, and also international organizations show the support in many forms. So we're always happy to help countries, but I think what's key, I find sometimes when countries are affected, people or agencies just want to dump things to the country. What's important is wait until you have the assessment and find what was the exact needs. Because sometimes what you end up doing, you end up probably having an impact on the country economy, sometimes sending waste to the country. I think at one time a lot of zinc sheet was sent to Jamaica after a hurricane, and what you find after a piece of time, people couldn't sell zinc sheet because zinc sheet was free. So
it was actually too much. Because, I mean,
effective.
it's logically thinking, it's a logical item to send because hurricanes, people, the homes are destroyed and the roofs have gone and so on.
And I think even 2005 for Guyana, people sent rice and water to Guyana, and we have that
and we have
a lot of rice and water. So we have to be careful of the needs of the countries, and even in communities, before we do any distribution to a community, we go and do an assessment. Because the food supply for a Amerindian community and the food supply for, say, an urban community is totally different. So you got to try and identify the needs for a particular community and try to give them that. Because try to make the people as comfortable as possible when they're affected.
Okay, eventually I would want to get to some of the current projects that you're working on. But before we do that, during the Jubilee celebrations, I was very impressed with some of the things that I would have seen CDC doing, and I've even expressed this to you, of course, off camera. There, you had an area on Homestretch Avenue, just opposite Jubilee Park, what is now called Jubilee Park, where you had persons who would have, if they got lost, children, if people got sick. Let's talk about CDC's success rate during that period, and if it was if it was somehow new for Guyana, and if we can expect to see that sort of initiative when it comes to big programs and big seasons and big celebrations like those in the future.
It's not nothing new. Dating back in 2007, when Cricket World Cup was hosted in Guyana, the whole system started whereby you have to establish a mass casualty management system and establishment of venue operating center. At the venue operating center is a multi-agency body where you have critical agencies such as police, fire, GDF, hospitals, as a coordination mechanism to monitor what's happening. just going to what happened during the Jubilee celebration, we've recognized that they're going to be one of the largest mass gathering within the country. And in the event something should happen, and we're happy nothing may happen, we must have our systems in place. So what we have, we set up what's called a venue operation center, and then we set up a treatment area, which had all the medical supplies, equipment, beds, and we had now ambulances on standby. And we had search and rescue team. We had like 4 search and rescue teams on standby. But before we had all these things in place, we trained people so that they could know their roles and responsibility. We had exercises. We had tabletop exercises to test the coordination mechanism, and we also had exercises down at at a full scale, but a functional exercise at the site at Durban Park, so people could test and see where they have challenges, and then we try to fix those things before. But I think that was a very successful event because I think we saved lives within those 2 days.
I was getting to that, if you felt that it was
I
really
think we
useful.
saved lives because there's a lot of people there, and a lot of people, for instance, we had a number of persons who were asthmatic that we actually evacuated from the crowd via the ambulance to the treatment area. We also had persons who were suffering from heart attacks. And if we weren't there, and we and the medical personnel, and I must thank all those agencies that participated, including Guyana Red Cross Society, the Georgetown Public Hospital, the St. John's Ambulance Brigade, Davis Moore Hospital, and Mercy Hospital. All of those agencies worked very hard during the period. And I think we give our appreciation to those persons after the actual event. So I think that if it wasn't for that well-coordinated team in place, maybe a few persons would have died.
Well, we're happy that the CDC was on hand to save the day. I would also want to talk about assistance from the U.S. that you will soon get. But before we move to that, what is the CDC doing currently now? And we know there is a situation in Region 5. Let's talk about some of the current projects or that you're working on.
All right. The CDC is stretched. We're working way down in Region 9. We're doing work in Region 5. And as a matter of fact, as we speak, we're doing work in Region 6. In Region 9, the focus a few months ago was on drought. And we provide food supplies to those persons affected. And we also provided water tanks and pumps and water purification tablets to persons in those communities way down in Deep South. We're also working with the Brazilians to drill a number of wells in the communities in southern Rupununi, the most southern communities. And so at the moment, we're actually in the planning stage. We did a forest assessment, identified a location, and now the Brazilian military is now working on the plans and trying to get up the resources to start drilling sometime August, September. And then what we're also doing now, because of rainfall, we're monitoring throughout the country what's happening. Last weekend, we went into Morocco because that was affected, and we went and distributed 160 food hampers to the persons affected. On Tuesday and Wednesday, we sent a team in the Maikoni River and also West Berbice to do assessment of the impact. After we analyze the assessment, if there's the need for food supply and other intervention, we'll also work on having that supply to those communities. However, what we've noted is the immediate intervention in terms of releasing the water from the communities, and we've been working in collaboration and in more of an advisory role with agencies such as the National Drainage and Irrigation Authority and the Ministry of Public Infrastructure, and also the Regional Democratic Council. In Region 6, we've acquired funding from the Canadian government to renovate the Fort Ordnance Primary School into a shelter. So what it entails is it's installing new
features,
washroom facilities, kitchen, and what's going to happen? The school is going to benefit And so when something happens now, then there is a shelter that can be used, all the facilities for male and female. So there'll be an increase in water supply. So what's happening over from Tuesday to Friday, we conduct training for members of the community, the Fort Ordnance community. We've trained people in shelter management. So they're going to now be able to manage the shelter for the community in the event that something happens.
Right, so they don't necessarily have to wholly and solely depend on CDC or other.
And I think you mentioned before the support from the U.S. Embassy,
the US
government.
Oil, we're talking about
But
oil, and I know.
we've received a lot of support from the United States government in terms of developing mainly our response mechanism, preparedness and response mechanism. They have been providing training for a number of years in areas like emergency operation management and search and rescue through U.S. aid. Some of the major support from them was a warehouse. They constructed a warehouse in Tamari and supplied with a lot of equipment that we can use in the event of a disaster. So we have a fully stocked warehouse in Tamari with boats and generators, engines, mattresses, cots, stretchers, and some of the stuff that we use for Jubilee celebration. Next to the warehouse, and a few years ago, they constructed a emergency operations center, which we call our alternate emergency operations center. Because we live in Georgetown, our office is in Georgetown, and if there's flooding in Georgetown, we can't operate. We have a second office that we can go to that's fully equipped with all the telephone communication facilities, all that we have in Georgetown, and more is in Tamari. So we could smoothly move from Georgetown to Tamari.
So right, you can still function.
And now what they're doing on the 27th to the 1st, they'll be working with us to actually help in developing SOPs and plans to deal with oil spill response, because we're doing exploration now, and if there's oil, we gotta prepare for it. So we don't want to wait until the thing happens then to start putting the system in place. But prior to that, we've been working with all the agencies that are doing the exploration. For instance, ExxonMobil, Repsol, CGX, and we have reviewed all of their plans and ensure that they're in keeping with our policies and our national plans to deal with disaster risk management. We're also doing some work with the regions. Next week we're going to Region 6 and roll out the final phase of the region disaster risk management system. So we're going to meet with all the senior persons in the region, and not only the government persons from the region, but we're meeting with the private sector persons. So we have GT&T, if the GT&T in the region, if you have GPL, if you have GWI, we meet with you and we orient this person to the new plans, so that we'd have a regional system that could work on their own. So we're trying to ensure the regions now are a bit more independent to conduct their disaster risk management work and to coordinate disasters when it happens. Because if you look on television, when something happens in a state, you have or in a city, you have the governor and you have the mayor. They come out and they run it. Likewise, I'd want to see when something happens in a region, the regional chairman, the REO, get the work done.
Because I remember when I was younger, I would be like, sometimes you're looking at CNN. Okay, the mayor talked about this already. Why do we need the governor? But it is necessary because, again, it's disaster risk management and so on.
So that's the system we put in place so that regions could manage their emergency. And when it gets out of hand, then the CDC comes in and tries to get other assistance from other agencies, regional assistance, and international assistance.
Okay, great. I think you have said it all. You practically did my job for me today, which is good. Of course, I soon have to wrap up my conversation with you, but I want to congratulate you and the entire CDC team and so on, and continue to do, of course, what it is that you have been doing. Again, Guyana, I keep saying that we only think about or remember the CDC organizations or commissions like these when something happens, and we should not wait until something happens before we know what to do, or before we try to learn, snap quickly what should be done. Before I let you go, Major Craig, is there anything else that you would like to talk about at this point that I am maybe missing? Because I know you're the inside man, so you know what's going on. Is there anything that you would have missed?
I think what we need to do, I think nationally as a nation, we need to embrace disaster risk management, disaster risk reduction. We should incorporate it in all our policies and all our plans. Because what happens, if you reduce risk, you reduce the amount of money that you spend on response and recovery
Yeah.
and rehabilitation.
Save lives too.
And you save lives and protect properties. So we should try to, everything we do, we should incorporate disaster risk reduction. We should incorporate disaster risk reduction into development. There should be a close relationship with disaster risk reduction and climate change adaptation.
This is where the Met Office should come in. What is the relationship like
Well,
between CDC and Met Office?
we have a very good relationship with the Met Office,
Okay.
and it's growing. As a matter of fact, I probably need to mention it. We have what's called a National Disaster Risk Reduction Platform. It used to be chaired by the Director General of the CDC, but now it's been chaired by the Minister of State, which I think is give it more clout.
Okay.
And so that platform meets quarterly and bring all the agencies together and look at the programs and see how we can now incorporate disaster risk management into national programs and policies. A subcommittee of that platform is a platform early warning, and that's headed by Hydromet. And early warning is critical. I would like to see we have a very effective early warning system because you want to know what's happening before, long before. Don't wait till it happens and then take actions.
Yeah, because I mean in Guyana we joke about it all the time that okay, Met Office say well it will rain today and sometime 12 o'clock in the day. I mean I would kid around with colleagues. Well, the day is not over yet. They said it would rain today, but you know they weren't specific. But I guess as we grow, as we develop, they will become a little more accurate. I am not saying that they're never accurate. Viewers, don't take me out of context. I know many times, most of the times they are, but again,
They're
it's all in
improving.
development.
They're improving.
Yeah.
And I think around the world, Met Office get the same complaint that in Guyana.
Yeah.
So it's not only a case in Guyana because it's difficult to monitor the weather. It changes, the wind direction changes. So
Exactly.
you might say now and by the time tomorrow, the wind change and the rain clouds go on to the next direction. So
Yeah.
we need to understand. But whenever there is a warning, take heed,
Take heed.
and prepare for it. It's better for you to prepare for it and nothing happen, or you don't prepare and something happens.
Something happened. Well said, sir. Thank you so very much for coming on Facing the Nation today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, viewers, this has been my conversation with the Deputy Director General of the Civil Defense Commission. And of course, he is also Operations and Training Officer, Major Kester Craig. This is where I'll take a break and come right back with you. Of course, well, it's not a break actually. I'll now show you clips from that press conference held early in the week. That's the post-cabinet press briefing by the Minister of State, the Honorable Joseph Harmon. This is Facing the Nation.